Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jackie, and I am tonight's MC for Science on Tap, and I have a confession. Yeah, I know, I believe in science. Tell me, do you believe in science? Oh, I don't know. That sounds kind of tepid. If you want to win that pint class, you got to believe in science. Now, do you believe in science? Thank you so much. That makes me feel so energized to be here today for this fabulous talk about how to talk to a science denier. This is going to be a fascinating philosophical discussion into how we perceive and convey information, find trust with others, and build a sense of community and a worldview that is based on facts. I am super thrilled and excited because this conversation is one that underpins so much of the work that we do here at Science on Tap. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Lee McIntyre. Lee is a philosophy professor, writer, and activist. As a child, growing up in Portland, less than a mile away from this very theater, he asked his mom a question, and his mom said, "I don't know the answer, but I'm sure that there is a scholar at a university somewhere studying the answer." And that really inspired him to go into academia. After years pursuing his graduate education with a PhD in philosophy from the University of Michigan, he went on the academic track, producing books and research papers in the field of the history of philosophy and how philosophy intersects with different areas of science. With the understanding that academia sometimes doesn't have the impact that you always want, while on sabbatical, he sneakily went away and wrote an awesome book. And since then, he has taken his career out of the ivy-covered halls of academia and has chosen to become a science writer and a fiction writer that's weaving together the words and the facts and the data and the stories behind some of the most interesting philosophical questions that are really facing society today. When he was younger, he was interested in addressing those questions through academia and teaching and education, and he still has a passion for teaching and education, which is why he's here tonight giving the speech today. But he wanted to reach a larger audience and make a bigger difference. He has subsequently written 8 books, and tonight we'll be hearing more about how to talk to a science denier. So if everybody could put their hands together and please welcome Lee McIntyre to the stage.
Thank you so much. I should just go home right now. That was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. So, I grew up just about on the corner of Killingsworth and Cully. I could have walked here tonight, I didn't, but this is wonderful to be at my hometown, a Portland crowd. Thank you for inviting me to do this. This is wonderful. I want to talk to you tonight about how to defend science from science deniers by giving scientists and science communicators some better tools to push back. Now, you might be thinking, of course, what could be a better tool to use to push back than scientific evidence? But here's the problem. You all know what I'm going to say next. You don't convince someone who doesn't hold their beliefs based on evidence by giving them more evidence. This is called the information deficit model, and it doesn't work. So we need to be a bit more strategic. And I want to start, as a scholar, I want to start with what the research tells us. Some people are quite worried about something called the Backfire Effect. This was due to a paper by Brendan Nyhan and Jason Riefler in 2010, which purports to show that by presenting someone with contravening evidence, you can sometimes make things worse and cause them to double down on their mistaken beliefs. Now, the backfire effect, I mean, it's right there in the title. It's a perverse effect Because by trying to refute someone, we might actually be making them more committed to their mistaken beliefs, which raises the question, are we doing more harm than good when we try to argue with somebody who disagrees with us? And if that were true, it would let us off the hook. We wouldn't have to do anything and we could feel good about it. But here's the thing. A recent study by Ethan Porter and Thomas Wood and others since has shown that the backfire effect finding could not be replicated, which is great news because it means that you can't hurt anything by trying to convince someone to give up their denialist beliefs. You may not succeed, but you're not going to make it worse. Your intervention, in fact, might help because the worst thing, and this has been shown experimentally, the worst thing that you can possibly do is to walk away, to just let someone have the wrong idea and just walk away and not engage with them at all. That might feel good to you. You might say, well, I can't talk to these people. They're not going to listen anyway, and walk away. But that might lead to failure. But if you talk to them, it might work. Over the summer of 2019, in the journal Nature Human Behavior, they published a study by Cornelia Bache and Philip Schmid, which showed it provided the first empirical evidence to show that you can fight back effectively against science deniers, and they showed us how. This study was done online. It had about 1,770 subjects. It was in the United States and Germany. And it was done among subjects who were first exposed to incorrect scientific information, and then they were immediately provided with the corrective information. That's called debunking. And if I had slides, and I hate slides, but if I had slides, it would say debunking. So that's a form of debunking, and they found that in a statistically significant number of cases, it worked in getting deniers to give up their false beliefs. But there are two ways of doing it, and this is what was really, I think, genius about the study. The first way is perhaps no surprise. It's called content rebuttal, and it's when perhaps you're a content expert in the field, and it's the subject is something that you know about, and you can provide the facts. I mean, if you're a climatologist and you're talking to somebody about climate denial, go nuts. I mean, you know what you're talking about. So, go ahead. That's going to be your way to do it. But what do you do if you're not a climatologist? Do you have no role? I mean, if you are not an expert in whatever the area is that the person is denying. What about the rest of us who aren't scientists? I'm not a scientist, I'm a philosopher of science, and I love science, but I'm not a scientist. Here's where the study really helps, because they found that there was a second strategy, which has to do not with the content of the denier's beliefs, but with the flawed reasoning scheme that led them to that belief. This is called technique rebuttal, and it's based on an original insight by Mark and Chris Hufnagel, later developed by cognitive scientists John Cook and Stephen Lewandowski, which showed that all science deniers follow the same flawed blueprint. This is going to be very familiar to you from the quiz that you just took. They cherry-pick evidence. They believe in conspiracy theories. They rely on fake experts and they discredit real experts. They engage in illogical reasoning. And my favorite, they insist that science has to be perfect to be credible. You've all talked to science deniers who say, can you prove it? Can you prove it? Can you prove it? So you can't prove it, so I could be right. Well, that's like, yeah, so you're telling me there's a chance. No, that's not how it works. And what Bache and Schmid showed, some of you got the reference to the Jim Carrey movie, and what Bache and Schmid showed is that if you learn these 5 tropes of science denial, you can use them to undercut denialist beliefs. There are some examples in their paper. I suggest that you look at the paper. It's a very readable paper, along with a few scripts for what you can say. But here's what I want to tell you about it to bring home tonight. Here's the knockout punch. Bache and Schmid found that both content rebuttal and technique rebuttal worked equally well in converting science deniers. And there's no additive effect. If you did one, you didn't have to do the other, which is spectacular news. Because it means that you don't have to, not only do you not have to be a scientist, But you can be just as effective as a scientist if you know those 5 steps. So it means that we all can play a role in engaging with science deniers. Now, here's some bad news. Take another drink. Because the studies showed that we can only mitigate, not overturn the effect of exposure to scientific misinformation. Once a population hears a falsehood, there are some of them who will just believe it even once it's been debunked, which is sort of distressing, isn't it? Because they just heard the misinformation, and 10 seconds later it was debunked, but they said, nope, I believe it. So the person who shared it with them is now telling them, no, that's wrong, and they're going, nope. So, I mean, that's a little distressing. But also very human. No matter how good you are at debunking, at the group level, there's always going to be some lingering negative effect of an exposure to misinformation. That's how powerful it is. When somebody hears, it's called the primacy effect. When somebody hears a lie, they're going to believe, some of them are going to believe that lie, even if you then say, oh, that was a lie. Which means that the best thing is not to allow the deniers to be able to spread their misinformation in the first place, but the worst thing is to walk away. Bates and Schmidt joke that if you're invited to a debate, say yes and then cancel. If it means that the event will be canceled, if not, you have to show up. Why? Because you don't want the audience to hear the misinformation. You don't want that one-sided debate. Now, of course, as an academic study, there are also some limitations with the Bates and Schmidt finding. These are not mistakes or fraud or even negative findings that I'm going to talk about now, just the idea that no one study can cover everything that's relevant to an underlying question. The first limitation is one of time proximity. This study, as I said, only dealt with debunking science denial messages immediately after they were heard by a naive subject. A naive subject meaning they'd never heard that piece of misinformation before. You know, oh, did you know X? And they're hearing it for the first time. But what about the problem of overturning the beliefs of hardcore deniers whose convictions have been set in stone after marinating in scientific misinformation for a decade? And you all know them. You all have someone in your life who is like this. They're not hearing it for the first time, and they're telling you for the 10,000th time because they've been thinking about it for a long time. Could content rebuttal or technique rebuttal work on those people as well? We don't know because it wasn't studied. One intriguing query along these lines came up in response to the original study by a scholar at the University of Cambridge named Sander van der Linden, who brought up the issue of something called pre-bunking. Okay, next slide, pre-bunking. What if you used technique rebuttal, for instance, not to wait until someone had already heard false information, but you instead tried to intervene beforehand, right? Maybe you said to them, look, you're going to hear a conspiracy theory about vaccines. Here's why that's dangerous. Don't believe it. Research shows that if you do that, it's quite effective. It's more effective to pre-bunk than to debunk, because remember the primacy effect? You get to people first and you tell them, this is what you're going to hear, and it's a lie, and then when they hear it, they go, oh, that's a lie. So great, you know, Sander van der Linden's book is called Foolproof. I know him, he's wonderful. Buy his book. It's a terrific book. Here's the problem. Doesn't address my question about the hardcore deniers, doesn't it? Because you can't pre-bunk somebody that's been marinating in misinformation for 10 years. It's too late. You can't pre-bunk it. So my question still stands. Could a hardcore science denier's beliefs be debunked with either content rebuttal or technique rebuttal? I hope so. Hasn't been studied. A second limitation is that the study was only done online. Now look, I get it. I understand why scientific studies are done online. But unfortunately, we encounter science deniers sometimes online, but a lot of times across the Thanksgiving table, or on the street, or in the next voting booth. I mean, they're everywhere, and we want to know what to say to them, right? And so the question comes up, might the technique rebuttal and the content rebuttal work better? Would it work in that venue? I mean, look, it was only studied online, so maybe it only works online. But don't you have a suspicion, could this work? And could it maybe even work better face-to-face? Imagine technique rebuttal face-to-face. That was not in the study. Now, I think those are two questions that I had after reading this study, and I think there might be some answers to this, but here we're going to do a very bad thing, because this is Science on Tap, science communicators, so don't tell anybody. We're going to outrun the empirical literature, and we're going to talk about the anecdotal literature, okay? Which I read, and there have not been studies on what I'm about to talk about, but if you read the anecdotal literature, you will notice some patterns, and they could very well be studied. There are many examples in the news media of hardcore science deniers who changed their mind. You may not have met them, but they're out there. We talked about one. I have a thick file on my desk of these. I love these. If you see these, send them to me. I love to read about who doesn't like to read about a hardcore science denier who changed their mind? I heard you cheer about the right answer with Jim Bridenstine. I mean, really? Yeah. And here's the pattern that I noticed. Virtually every hardcore science denier who has ever changed their mind on a scientific subject has done so after a face-to-face encounter when evidence was presented by someone with whom they had a trusting relationship. That does not mean that that will always work, okay? This is the difference in philosophy between a necessary and a sufficient condition, right? The people who change their mind, that's how it's done. It's a necessary condition. Is it sufficient? Unfortunately, no. Just because you have a trusting relationship. But you know what it does mean? It means that if somebody who's a hardcore denier doesn't trust anybody, or they trust you but you won't talk to them about this, there's no hope. They won't change their mind, because the stories are heartbreaking and inspiring, both at the same time, of hardcore deniers who, when somebody reaches out to them with trust and love and understanding, can change their mind. And there are examples of this, and I talk about a lot of them in my book. So here's the thing. Personal engagement is key. It's why I don't use slides. I don't want any barrier. I want to have as much personal engagement with people as I can. Science deniers don't have an information deficit. They have a trust deficit. You can be the person in their life that they trust. If they already love you, maybe they trust you, and maybe, as infuriating as they are, you can help to change their mind. Here I want to provide just a little bit of context for the trivia. So the trivia kind of stole my vibe here, a little bit of a couple of examples, but I still want to go over them, but more quickly than I had planned to. So you remember that case of Jay Inslee sending people down? It wasn't Jay Inslee himself who came down. He sent public health officials down to Vancouver, just across the river. Why do I say that? Where I'm in Portland, you all know that. Clark County was pretty heavily anti-vax, so of course that's where they had the measles outbreak, and he sent down these public health officials, and I'm not going to say it worked universally, but it was quite a number of people that they ended up convincing. And if you want to read about it, you can go to the Washington Post and put in Google. It will take, not right now, okay? It will take off like wildfire. There's a story in the Washington Post about it, and you notice something very interesting here. What was most interesting to me about that story was the comments from the people who had had their mind changed. There was one woman who told the story of a scientist, complete with the lab coat and the whiteboard, who took 2 hours to explain cell interaction. And she changed her mind. Now, you know why she changed her mind? She said, well, he was very factual, but he was also very warm. He was very approachable. She liked him, part of why she changed her mind. Now, I get it. 2 hours? 2 hours per person? I mean, we'd better start now, right? That's very difficult to do. I bring it up simply to pop the bubble that it's impossible to do this. It is possible to do this. You may not want to make the commitment or the time. Maybe there's another way to do it, maybe if we all did it. But the point is, if you ever find yourself thinking, oh, it's impossible, it's not impossible. The second story, my favorite, is the one that's already been scooped by the trivias about Jim Bridenstine, because, so here's Jim Bridenstine. Imagine, he's a typical politician. He gives a speech in the well of the US House and he says all the things that climate deniers say. And then, of course, Trump makes him head of NASA, because what else are you gonna do with a guy like that but make him head of perhaps the preeminent organization in the entire world that studies climate change? I mean, well played, Mr. Trump, right? So Bridenstine goes in there, and a few months later, I mean, that wasn't in the trivia, was it? It didn't take long. It was weeks. I think it was a month that he changed his mind. Why would he change his mind? And they asked him why, and he said, well, I read a lot. Well, I kind of doubt that, but why did he change his mind? I think he changed his mind because all of a sudden he met some scientists, and he found what? They were warm, they were trustworthy, they were nice people. He was their boss. He met them in the hallway. He went out to lunch with them. Can't prove it, but I think that had something to do with it. I think face-to-face conversation is how you build trust. Those of you who have read the work of Jonathan Haidt, Dan Kahan, know that belief is often shaped by issues of identity and values and community. We want to believe what the other people around us believe. Now, ask yourself, for a science denier, do they know a scientist? Some of you went to the March for Science. I went to the March for Science. We were all talking to one another. It felt great. But why weren't we talking to other people outside? Do scientists have business cards? Scientists need to meet people and hand out business cards. So, meet a scientist, just like the Jay Inslee example or the Bridenstine example. If you're dealing with hardcore science deniers, which is the ones that I'm interested in, context matters a lot. It's not that evidence can't be persuasive. Remember I talked about the information deficit model? It's not that evidence can't be persuasive. It's that you have to approach someone in the right way with the evidence, and it matters a lot who you are to them, because they have to trust you. Here's some tips. Don't insult them. Don't call them a science denier, that's for sure. That's just, in private here where nobody's listening. Don't yell at them. Treat them with respect. Stay calm. Put a smile on your face. Listen to what they have to say. You ever notice how if you ask somebody they're just diatribe, and they'll talk and talk and talk, and then they'll say, well, what do you think? Don't you think I'm right? And then that's your opportunity. So listen. If someone feels heard, then they're more likely to want to listen to what you have to say. So I think that you can change the minds of someone if you take that person seriously, you engage with them, and you begin to have a dialogue. And here I want to tell you about one of my personal experiences that I think you're going to enjoy. I'm going to need a drink for this. Thank you very much. Okay. Wow. In November 2018, I went to a Flat Earth convention. I'll say that again. In November 2018, I flew out to Denver, Colorado, where I spent 48 hours at the Flat Earth International Conference with 650 people who believe that the Earth is flat, that Antarctica isn't a continent, but an ice wall spread out along the perimeter of the Earth, so the water doesn't fall off, that the sun, moon, and stars are very close. What are you laughing at? That the sun, moon, and stars are very close to us, just outside the dome that covers the Earth. And in fact, that's why we've never been to the moon, because no rocket ship can get outside the dome. This is what they genuinely believe. I spent it was a 2-day conference, and I spent the first day incognito. I put on the flannel shirt, I had the lanyard, and I went, and I kept my mouth shut. Actually, my jaw dropped a couple of times, but I kept my mouth shut. I listened to what they had to say, because their big beef when they started was, you people in the media, because there were some media people there, you're just going to be here for 10 minutes, and you're going to get the story, and then you're going to leave, but you're not going to hear what we have to say. And sure enough, after about 10 minutes, all the people from the newspapers, yeah, they left. And then, and I'll never forget this, they closed the doors, and then the speaker said, "It's just us now." And I thought, what is about to happen? And, but I kept my cool, and I listened, and I took notes, and I was there amongst them. And then I was trying to think, what am I going to say to them? Because my plan was on the second day to come out as a philosopher of science. Now, I caught a break here, because to a person, the people that I spoke with, although many of them were religious folks, said, my beliefs are based on evidence. By the way, most religious folks are not flat earthers, okay? But what I'm saying is that a number of the folks who were there, but a number of them were also secular. And when they said, oh, my beliefs are based on evidence, I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna watch these seminars, I'm gonna see what they think, what they mean by evidence, and I was trying to remember everything that I knew from physics, because remember, I'm not a scientist. And boy, they've read their Newton, they've read their Galileo, they know their science, they don't apply it correctly, but sometimes it's right, and sometimes you think, what? I don't remember that. So I didn't want to just launch in and try to present them with scientific evidence. For one thing, they already knew it, and they weren't convinced. And if the evidence had been around for 2,300 years, and why were they going to suddenly believe it from me? It just wasn't going to work. They were conspiracy theorists. They already knew all of the standard evidence for a round Earth, but they didn't trust the scientists who were sharing it with them. They thought that they were being bamboozled. They thought that every single teacher, scientist, government official, airline pilot was in on the conspiracy of the flat Earth. And I heard somebody joke before, how did they get there? They flew. They flew, and they live tweeted on their phones, which had satellite internet traffic, by the way. Think about that. About flat Earth. So, all right. So what was I going to do? Instead of talking to them about the evidence, which I wasn't going to make any progress, I thought, well, look, I'm a philosopher. I want to talk to them about their reasoning. I want to talk to them about why, not what they believe, but why they believe it. And here I borrowed a question from one of my favorite philosophers, Karl Popper. You may know who Karl Popper is. Yes. What evidence, if I had it in my back pocket, would convince you to change your mind? So if your belief's based on evidence, then theoretically there should be some evidence that I could give you that would change your mind. If you're a scientist, you know that's true. But if you can't tell me what evidence, if I could provide it, would change your mind, then it strongly suggests that your belief is not based on evidence, which is a very bad thing. They could not answer that question, and they were uncomfortable with that, and I shut my mouth again and I let them sit with that discomfort. Because they were scripted and ready to talk about the evidence. Anything that you think proves that the Earth is round, they had a reason why that experiment was flawed. There was, something was wrong with that. But when I asked them, okay, so what would change your mind? They really couldn't answer that. So I was out there doing technique rebuttal. And this was before Bates and Schmidt, which is why I love the study, right? I mean, confirmation bias works on philosophers too. This is why I like the study so much. But look, my working theory was that why did I take flat Earth seriously? Well, for one, it's a bigger movement than you think, and it's growing, and they're going to be running for your school board sooner than you think, and teach the controversy. And that's not a joke. That's part of their aim. My working theory was that flat Earth, and indeed all science denial, was all based on identity and ideology. And remember those 5 tropes? It all works the same way. So if I could go to the Flat Earth International Conference and learn how to talk to them, then I could talk to climate deniers. Then I could talk to anti-vaxxers. That's what I really wanted to learn how to do. And of course, these conventions are used to recruit new members. And so when I was speaking to someone, I I like to have an audience, right? I like to grab the speakers just after they came off stage and ask them questions. One guy I took out to dinner and we talked for 2 hours. He had just given a seminar on how to recruit people into flat Earth. He would be out on a street corner with a sign, "Earth is flat, change my mind." And he would engage with people, and he was very good. And what I noticed with this guy is that the same techniques he was using were the ones I was using. He was patient. He was kind. He was empathetic. He didn't yell. He respected. He listened. I thought, I gotta buy this guy dinner. And we did. And for 2 hours, with no recording of the conversation, just the two of us, we spoke. And I have to say, he was a very intelligent guy. He was not a dumb guy. And so when I asked him my question, what evidence, if I had it in my back pocket, could change your mind, you could see it come over his face. I've got to be able to answer that question. There's a famous biologist that they asked him, what could change your mind about evolution? And he said, rabbit fossils in the Precambrian era. Pretty damn specific, right? So I asked him, what evidence could change your mind? And he said, well, if I went up in a rocket and I saw that the Earth was round, but no, the window might be curved. Okay. See, conspiracy theory. And then there was another moment when he said, I've got to tell you this part. He said, well, actually, I played a little joke because I said, well, look, how about if we took a flight over Antarctica? Because I just got out of a seminar where they had said that Antarctica didn't exist. It was a mountain range. And why didn't we fly over Antarctica? Because that would prove that it existed, wouldn't it? And he said, there are no flights over Antarctica. And in my back pocket, I had a flight from South America to New Zealand that went over Antarctica. And he said, have you been on that flight? And I said, no. Have you? Do you want to go? I'll pay for your ticket. And he shook my hand, and I thought, Nat Geo, here we come, right? We're gonna be able to do this. But the more, he said, can I do my experiments on the flight? Absolutely. And then I said, but look, we need a criteria, right? Because I don't want to get back and have you say the windows were curved. So we got to have something that we can both measure. How about time? Because if you're right, Antarctica is 26,000 miles. And if I'm right, it's not. You could fly over it. And so how about if we have to stop to refuel the plane, then that means it's 26,000. But if we can get over in one tank of gas, which I really hope I'm right, then Antarctica's a continent. And he said, okay, and he shook my hand again, and I thought, that's it, we're gonna do this. And then he said words that I'll never forget. He said, nope, I can't do it. And I was kind of mortified, and I said, well, why not? I was really kind of looking forward to this. And he said, because maybe it's a hoax. And I said, what's a hoax? What's a hoax? And he said, maybe no plane ever has to stop. And I said, what do you mean? Planes stop all the time, they have to refuel. And he said, yeah, what if planes don't have to stop to refuel? They just pretend to refuel. And I said, so you are telling me that right now, that the entire history of aviation since the 1940s has been a hoax against the day when I'm gonna be sitting here with you trying to convince you to fly over Antarctica to prove that the Earth is not flat? And he said, yes. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you said right now, no, you can't do this. But remember Jim Bridenstine, right? Remember that this is possible. Now look, I made a huge mistake with this fella because I didn't get his phone number. I didn't get his email. I didn't keep up with him. What hubris to think that I could go in there as this guy from Boston who was gonna, this elitist who was gonna go in and tell him that he was wrong. I should have tried to build trust with him. And I didn't. I built a certain amount of trust by buying him dinner and speaking with him, but I really screwed up. In the time that I was at the Flat Earth Convention, I did not convince anyone to, tear off their lanyard and say what a fool I was. Now, maybe that's not surprising. They were there with 649 other people. They're not going to do it. But that was distressing. But then I thought about it, and maybe cognitive dissonance set in, and I thought, it would have been great if I could convince somebody. But maybe what I did was prove that I could talk to them. Notice the title of the book, How to Talk to a Science Denier. And talking to somebody is a precondition for convincing them. So here's the thing. If you say it's not worth arguing with these people, you're a science denier. Bache and Schmid have shown that it is worth arguing with these people because sometimes it works. It doesn't always work. It doesn't even often work. But it can, if anything is going to work, if anything is going to work, that is what's going to work. Now, in closing here, because I want to leave some time for the Q&A, I just want to make some very brief remarks that led me after this to write a new book called On Disinformation. This problem that I have described to you has now metastasized to reality denial. It is no longer just science that's in danger, it is reality itself. Not just science, democracy, everything that we care about. Because those 5 steps are not just followed by science deniers, they're followed by reality deniers about topics like, I don't know, whether an election was stolen, about all sorts of things that we read about in the news these days. And disinformation is a part of this. Disinformation is, in fact, where denialism comes from. People do not wake up one day wondering whether there's a Jewish space laser. They don't wake up one day wondering, just thinking, oh my God, I wonder if there are tracking microchips in the vaccines. Do you know where that came from? How many of you have heard that idea that they're tracking microchips in the COVID vaccines? Everybody, right? Does anybody know where that came from? Okay, where did it come? But those were the amplifiers. Where did it come before that? Russia, correct. The SVR, which is the KGB. In April 2020, an article appeared in a publication called the Oriental Review, April 2020, which said that any future vaccines developed in the West would have tracking microchips in them, courtesy of Bill Gates, who held patent 666 on that technology. And it said, share on Facebook, share on Twitter, which is how it got to Fox News, which is how it got to 4chan, which is how it got to Facebook. In May 2020, 28% of the American people believed that there was something to this idea. That is an enormously successful disinformation campaign. In a month, 5 months before the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were even developed, they had already poisoned our mind with the idea that there were tracking microchips. What the article did not say is that the Oriental Review is one of 4 English language propaganda arms of the SVR, and that they made this up. Why did they make it up? Remember how disinformation works. Disinformation is a lie created by someone who has an interest at stake. What was Russia's interest? To divide the West. There's an article in the New York Times from 2019 which is titled Putin's Long War Against American Science. They've been after our science for quite some time. But in this case in particular, Russia had a vaccine called the Sputnik 5. Do you think their national pride wasn't on the line? The Sputnik, right? That was the one that they wanted people to take. Plus, it was very lucrative. So, to me, as easy it is to laugh at science deniers, and sometimes we do, and sometimes we need to, because it's a tough world, especially if you talk to science deniers all day. You need to laugh about it sometimes. I want you to remember something. By and large, they're victims. By and large, they're doing somebody else's bidding without realizing it, which is the irony, because they're so afraid, they're conspiracy theorists, and they're so afraid of being duped. And they're right, but they just don't realize who's doing the duping, right? They're right to be suspicious, but they're being lied to, they're trusting the wrong people. Try saying that to your uncle across the Thanksgiving table, right? I'm going to stop here, though I had a little bit more, and just hear some of what you have to think about this. The connection of this to what's going on now with reality denial is something that is literally keeping me up at night, because I had thought it was just about science. After January 6th, I realized, oh no, this is the same. This is the same exact thing. The blueprint that was followed, started by the tobacco companies in the 1950s, followed by the fossil fuel companies, then to anti-vax, is now happening on a national scale in our politics. That's it.
I want to be you when I grow up. So we're going to enter into the question and answer phase of the evening. So if we can bring the lights up just a little bit so we can see the audience, that would be fabulous. So for this portion of the evening, we have a couple of requests. Number one, we ask that your question end in a question mark. Please and thank you. We ask that your question be singular and not plural. And then lastly, we ask that you keep the microphone very, very close to your mouth so that we can hear you. If I am close to the edge, I will hold the microphone, but if I have to pass the microphone in, then please keep it close to your mouth. This is so that we can make sure that everybody can hear your questions. I will go around and ask, I'll raise my hand, and if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will point to whether or not I'm going to be coming to you next. We have a limited amount of time, so unfortunately, it may be the case that not every question gets answered, but Lee is going to be signing his book out in the lobby area, and we encourage you to stop by, grab a copy of his most recent book, and then also ask more questions, because there is so much conversation to be had on this topic. So I'm going to start us off by asking you a question, and that is, what about recidivism? Once you've talked to somebody and garnered trust with them and perhaps gotten them to change their mind, we all live in echo chambers of hearing our own opinion over and over and over again. How can we make sure that someone who we've been able to convince that the earth is not flat, that they are going to maintain that belief over time?
Yeah. It's a great question, and the answer is a little challenging, but I think true, which is that if you remember that if somebody is a denier, their beliefs are not based on evidence, because how could it be, right? It's based on identity, it's based on ideology, it's based on community. You have to change their identity. And that's not a one-shot deal. It means that you have to kind of provide a new community for them. Welcome them in. Don't just provide them the facts and they go, yeah, I guess you're right, and then leave it off. Invite them to start coming to science events, form a new community, meet other people. If you read the stories of people who get out of anti-vax, that's how it happens. They join a new community. Also read around the other areas where this happens. How do they talk people out of cults? Daryl Davis, who is one of my heroes, is a musician who has single-handedly talked 200 people out of the Ku Klux Klan. Daryl Davis is African American. How did he do that? He said through friendship. And I can't convince even one flat earther. He can do that, right? This methodology is not something that I invented. This works, but it means that you have to be committed to helping that person find a new identity, a new community. Otherwise, they will slip back.
Next question.
Hi. Yeah, Daryl's awesome. People should look him up. My question is maybe a little about perhaps pre-bunking. I'm interested in, so you said, I like that you said that these people that believe these things are smart and do a lot of research. Yes. I was a biology professor for a while, and I wish my students did 1/10 of the amount of research and put effort into what they're studying as these people do. But they're just studying the wrong things. And so I'm curious as to what you think our disconnect is there. Why do they want to seek out information and do seek out information, but they're just going to the wrong sources? What is mainstream science doing? I'm sure it's like jargon and kind of a smugness, but what else are they doing wrong that we are not reaching the audience that we want to reach?
Well, think about where people learn about science, and then think about where the first place that people turn when they want to learn about something they don't know. They go to YouTube, they go to Facebook, they go to Twitter. And I guarantee that if you go to YouTube and put in, is flat earth real? The first 3 hits you're gonna get are flat earther videos. And then you watch one, and what happens? The algorithm sends you to another one, and another one, and another one. And when I talk to people at Flat Earth International Conference, I ask them, how did you come to this belief? Every single person I spoke with, 25, 30 people, said YouTube videos.
What do we as the scientists
Make YouTube videos. I'm completely serious. We need to be out there. I mean, the volume of disinformation out there is enormous, and the algorithms that lead us toward it are punishing.
Hi. I wanted to know if you could repeat about the technique rebuttal, or 5.
Oh, the
ways
5
to do
things?
it, or like give an example or something of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the five things. So this is all in the book. It's also available if you look up the work of John Cook and Stephen Lewandowski or the Hoofnagel brothers. It's all online. They cherry pick evidence. They believe in conspiracy theories. They engage in illogical reasoning. That's not what you wanted me to talk about. You want me to give an example. How to do technique rebuttal. Okay, I'll send you to the paper. The Nature Human Behavior has scripts, it has examples. I can try to do one. I can try to do one here. I mean, imagine somebody says to you, "Did you know that there are tracking microchips in the vaccines?" You might say, "That's really interesting. Why do you believe that?" And then they say, "Well, haven't you heard it?" "Yes, I've heard it, but I'm skeptical, and I didn't know whether to believe it. I'm usually pretty skeptical about what I believe. Aren't you?" Well, yes. "Well, okay, so tell me where you found this." And then they'll Google around, and they'll find something, and then you can take a look at it. And this may not be just a single conversation. I get these all the time. And then I look, and I find, well, did you know that the person who, was behind that website is also selling something, it has a speaker series. I mean, that the disinformation dozen that we talked about earlier, a lot of them make money off vaccine denial. RFK Jr. makes a lot of money off vaccine denial. You don't think he does? There was an article in the New York Times about this. Oh, the New York Times, But, I mean, it is... There's nothing that I can say to kind of script out exactly how it should be every time, but there's an attitude that you should channel. Genuine curiosity about how an intelligent person could believe something like that without compelling evidence. So you can just say to them, but why would you believe that? I do have a better example that I just thought of. It would take me too long to do it here, but it's called the superior mirage effect. Remind me later and I'll tell you all about the superior mirage effect and how I used this against a flat earther who was arguing about why you could go out 50 miles in Lake Michigan and still see the Sears Tower, which you shouldn't be able to do. And my question was that always the case? Oh no, just some days, but why just those? I can say more. It's in the book as well.
Next question.
I don't quite recall what year these specific people went to the convention, but do you remember witnessing Mark Sargent and Patricia Steer speak?
So Mark Sargent is one of the easiest people to find at the Flat Earth International Convention because he wears a t-shirt that says, "I am Mark Sargent." And I don't recall that he was at the one in Denver in 2018, but he is all over the internet, easy to find. He had seemed to have some sort of a falling out with some of the folks who were there. They're a kind of a contentious bunch. By the way, don't confuse him with the Flat Earth Society. They hate that. They dislike the Flat Earth Society almost more than they dislike us. It's kind of like the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front. So be careful. But Mark Sargent, he was not there. I did get to meet the guy who took the rocket up 1,600 feet to try to see if the Earth was round or not. Now, the Burj Al Khali is taller than that, so he didn't need to go up in a rocket. But, I admired his experimental attitude. I mean, this guy was willing to put his life on the line. Does he believe it based on evidence? Well, he was trying to gather the evidence. He died the following year in that very rocket. So, I mean, when I say they're victims, sometimes they die. One of the guys that I spoke to at Flat Earth died a few years later of COVID because he was also a COVID denier. Now, I'll say this, just against myself. I don't know what the disinformation is behind Flat Earth. I can never tell anybody who ever made a buck or that it was political or ideological. That one I don't know. But the big four of science denial, climate, anti-vax, evolution, Flat Earth, I never quite figured out Flat Earth. The other three, you kind of know who's behind it. Who is it? What's the money? What's the interest at stake? It's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Hey, great talk. If you suspect a particular science denier is a narcissist and that's playing a part...
Who could you be talking about?
And that's... Truthfully, I'm thinking of my brother, but I know who I'm thinking of. And
is your brother here?
But there's
that would
many
be
examples.
rich.
No, he's not, thank goodness. But let's say you suspect that plays a part in their science, like that feeling of superiority is fueling this.
Yeah.
Any tips on how to talk or what to do or not to do with that type of science denier?
Pass. No, look, I don't think that, I don't have any specific tips because I don't think that what you want to do in trying to get somebody out of a science denial belief is to try to manipulate them in any way. The best antidote to a lie is the truth. And so you might say to him, you're my brother and it hurts me that you believe this. And you know what? Preserve the relationship. That's the best thing you could do to get him out of it. I get heartbreaking letters from people about they have family members who are anti-vaxxers or climate deniers or flat earthers. And what should I do? And my advice is always the same. Preserve the relationship, because as long as they've still got a loving, trusting relationship, they can still get out of it. And I mean, look, they pay a heavy price. Sometimes they die of COVID. The flat earthers, a lot of them had lost their jobs, gotten kicked out of their churches. Family members would no longer speak to them. They were shunned, which is why they were so joyous when they were together and why they kind of didn't like me being there, spoiling the party, right? But preserve the relationship. That's my best possible advice. But you say narcissist, don't. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, right? You know, how can I manipulate him? Just, you know, be. Wow, yeah. This is taped, you know. He might see this, and this might bring the light, or you might not get invited to his house coming up. I don't know. Yeah.
Hi, so I work in clinical research, and I found during the pandemic that there were a lot of populations, like low-income and minority populations, who were very, very scared of the vaccine coming out.
Yes.
And that was very understandable, because unfortunately, there's a lot of history and proof that those populations tend to be used and manipulated by drug companies with testing vaccines.
Yes.
In this situation, unfortunately, it wasn't the case. How do you approach minority and certain groups who have a lot of backing and
justification? Great question. I used to teach bioethics, and I mean, I know about the Tuskegee experiment and Henrietta Lacks DNA. And I mean, it is, the history that most people don't know is that there are a lot of folks who have historical justification for not trusting drug companies, vaccine makers, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you do in a case like that? But the answer is easy. They're not deniers. They're not deniers, which means they can be convinced by evidence, right? The folks you're talking about are not anti-vaxxers because they believe in some conspiracy theory that has no basis. They're anti-vaxxers maybe, or they're scared of vaccines, we'll put it that way, or vaccine hesitant, however you want to say it, for maybe good reason. But if somebody has good reason for their beliefs, then how do you convince them? You give them a better reason. And the better reason might be, you might die. There is an article in the Business Insider from years back about Dorothy Oliver and 3 of her friends in Alabama who were 4 African-American women who were awesome and walked around their own community and convinced hundreds of people to get vaccinated, confronted exactly this kind of historically situated and maybe even justified distrust and said, you're gonna get your vaccine and here's why, and engaged with folks. So that's another important thing. We need messengers for truth, sometimes in the community that we're trying to convince. That works.
All right, thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. I wondered, it seems like the root of the problem has to do with the inability to distinguish like disinformation from other information. And so that starts at a very young age. Are there any policies that you support or that to educate like young individuals that really focus on that early population? Because even now I see like my kids come home and they're like, oh mom, that website doesn't end in .org or .gut, so it's not reliable. Like they're starting to learn, but I feel like that might be part of the solution, and I wondered where you see that going.
I think you're right, and even with the bright lights, I can see who you've got here. Kids are naturally inquisitive and skeptical. My kids are always saying, how do you know that? How do you know that's true? I mean, from a young age. I mean, they grew up with a philosopher. But I mean, they were always asking me those kind of questions. So I think our education system should nurture that kind of thing in kids. And guess what? Other countries do it. In Finland, they have an entire curriculum built around this. In the United States, in some places, there's a teacher from California named Scott Bedley who taught 5th graders how to recognize fake news. He gave them, 10 or 12 steps on a rubric. Well, is there a byline on the article? What else has the person written? Does the title match, the content? He gave all these other things, and I mean, the kids loved it. The kids wouldn't go to recess, and please, Mr. Bedley, give me another one. Let's play the fake news game. So absolutely, we need to do that. Yes. But here's the bad news. We can't wait for the kids to grow up to save us, right? So yes, we need to do that, but we're in real trouble right now. So I think that adults need to do that. I've got a friend named Andy Norman who wrote a book called Mental Immunity. It is adult education for what we all could have learned in school but didn't. He's another philosopher about this. And when the oxygen mask drops and they say, put on your own oxygen mask before you help others, that's what this book is kind of about. Mental immunity is about taking care of your, pruning your own thoughts, and then you can help others. Now, full disclosure, I am a 40-year friend of Andy, and I'm on the board of a nonprofit that he runs called CIRSE, the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative. Sandra Vanderlyn, John Cook, Stephen Lundowski are all on it. So, and I don't make a penny from it, okay? But I'm just disclosing it so that you know that I'm affiliated with that group.
Next question.
Yeah, I watch way too many YouTube videos, and I've been...
Yeah, don't do that.
I've been picking up on a certain genre where it's an authoritative sounding male voice, a very expensively produced video with some elaborate content, but you never see the talking head
You just hear the voice?
Yeah, you just hear this authoritative male voice, and eventually it mispronounces a standard English word.
Yeah, it's AI.
And then, it's in an American accent on a subject of technology, energy transition, and so forth. But the title is EVs Are Dead, and then you find that in the any discussion of prices are in euros. So anyway, to me, I make my own conclusion about this. I think this is foreign-generated propaganda. And what my question is to you is, when anyone finds a YouTube video that they think really is propaganda for rational reasons, where do you take that information?
Well, the first place you could take it is the comment on the video itself. I mean, that's very important, right? How many of you, if you read comments on a video, go beyond the first couple of comments? I mean, if you get there first, flag it. You could also complain to YouTube. I mean, you could flag the video. I mean, look, I've seen these. Sometimes they're computer-generated voices. So, and you want to know, I mean, look, everybody thinks that they can recognize disinformation, but very few people actually do, or they think, well, somebody else could be influenced by it, but not me. But it's prevalent. And now, and I was just reading about this the other day, they have virtual news broadcasters on Chinese TV. These are not actually real people. They're avatars of real people, but they can just feed in a script and get them to say what's on the script in whatever authoritative voice or persona you care to put up on the screen, so that people can be influenced. This is getting worse and worse, and it will continue to get worse and worse. And here's what I want to warn you about. There's a backlash that can happen, because when something like that happens, it can make you so skeptical that you don't trust anything. The danger of that kind of thing is not that you think that a false thing is true. It will eventually reach the point where you think that there is no truth, that every true thing is false. Already, I just read a scary article the other day in a law journal about a trial attorney who was lamenting the fact that the day when they could no longer use video and audio exhibits at trial because jurors would think that they were all fake. Don't go there, right? But try to flag the things that you think are fake if you have evidence for them, especially. I think that's very important, especially now when AI is just, dawning on people. Oh, was that AI? Yeah. My book, by the way, if you look at my book on Amazon, you can find it. You can also find about 5 or 6 other books called A Handbook on Disinformation, Workbook on Disinformation, AI generated. They're 15 pages a piece, AI generated. It's prevalent.
Next question.
This has been really wonderful. Thank you. I am curious if in the face-to-face conversations and some of the approaches, is motivational interviewing being used as part of the rubric, and then stages of change? Those two concepts keep coming to mind as approaches that might be helpful.
Motivational interviewing is one of my favorite. I mean, again, I didn't invent this. People were doing motivational interviewing. Socrates was asking hard questions. There's something called street epistemology, where they train you how to, have these kind of conversations with people. I mean, if you can channel being curious and probing, empathetic but relentless, that's how to have these. But I love, people should all, Wikipedia is a lot better than you think. It's better than it used to be. Look at the Wikipedia article on motivational reasoning and learn, and also on street epistemology. You can learn quite a bit about how this overlaps with some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I narrowed in on conversations with hardcore science deniers, but these techniques are used for a lot of different things. Thank you. Motivational interviewing is very important.
I'm hard of hearing, so I missed a lot of the things that you said.
I'm so sorry.
I'm wondering if you could put some of the citations that you mentioned in your talk on web page or something associated with Science on Tap so I can read them?
So I apologize to you. I hope that there's some way that we can do that. One of the problems of not using slides is that I can't just throw something like that up. I would be happy to give you a free copy of my book that has all the citations in it.
Heck yeah.
Okay.
Second
Yes.
to last question.
Thank you very much. So we've all probably, my guess, self-selected tonight. We're probably all science believers. But I would bet that over the course of the week, somebody probably asked a colleague at work, what's your astrological sign? So my question is, and apologies, it's not exactly a clean one question, but I guess my question is astrology and other things like it a gateway drug that we need to be aware of? Is this all a spectrum? Is it not binary potentially? And are we all at risk potentially if we're not vigilant for ourselves?
We're all at risk anyway. Look, astrology, if I heard somebody clap for Karl Popper earlier. You want to hear about whether astrology is science, read Karl Popper. Astrology, no, not science, because it's unfalsifiable. Whatever. You read something that they say, this is written just for you, because you're a Leo, who this, who that, and you read it and it says, you sometimes feel insecure and that people don't really understand you. Occasionally you feel like an imposter, and you go, oh my God, this is exactly accurate. No, of course it's not science, but it's fun, isn't it? Is it a gateway drug? I don't know, but bless you for putting it that way, because that's kind of fun. Look, we're all possible to be victimized in this, and because there's nobody in the room and it's not being taped, I'll tell you a story about myself. I was writing this book, sitting at my desk every day studying science denial, and I was having trouble with my router, and so I got a new one, and it was a 5G router. Great big honking 5G router, brand new. And I started to kind of at the periphery hear things about 5G. And I thought, damn, 5G, I've got a new router, I don't know what that is. And I'm writing this book, I don't have time to research it. So I clicked over to Amazon and I bought myself a little titanium sleeve, or I don't know what it's made of, a little condom for my router, and I put it on there. It was a little Faraday cage, and my wife would come home from work and say the Wi-Fi is out, and I'd say nope, and just take it off, fine. But I did not want to have that. I mean, I didn't have time to research it, but there I was writing all day, and it was under my desk, pointing right at me, and then one day I thought, this is really bad, and so I took a half an hour and I researched it, and I took the thing off, because it's, and I mean, I was not one of those people out there, because I'm going to get hate mail. I was not one of those people out there who was, cutting down telephone poles in England or something, with 5G. But I just kind of, and I didn't really believe it. I just kind of thought, well, maybe, I don't know, could be something dangerous that they'll find out someday, precautionary principle. So I fell for it while I was writing this damn book. and I keep that little thing on my desk to remind myself, we're all potentially vulnerable. Now, don't tell anybody I told you that.
As you pointed out, this is being recorded. Last question.
I know.
Hopefully this will be quick. I run a historical weather site and get some rather interesting questions, patterns, and trends. Occasionally, the comments are rather let's just say colorful.
Yeah, I get those too.
Do you have any diffusing methodologies to help lower the level of anger and hostility in some
online?
Perhaps in emails or questions, not necessarily open online forums, those, no.
Online is the hardest because people can get angry when they can hide. And I get bombed on, Zoom meetings sometimes, with this. And I mean, no, I don't have a perfect answer for it. All I can say is that it's pretty hard for somebody when they're really angry and yelling and cursing, if you don't yell back, for them to keep it up. They kind of run out of steam. I had a guy one time who Zoom bombed in on a meeting, a paper I just given, Q&A, just like this, and he just cursing at me, calling me boy. I mean, it was awful, just the most disrespectful thing. And while the host was, trying to get out, I said, no, give me a minute. The guy was an anti-vaxxer, and I said, what's your concern? What are you afraid of? That's the way I put it. What are you afraid of? And I let him talk for a minute, and I could see the other, why are you giving this guy a platform? But we talked for a minute. And he kind of ran out of steam. And at the end of it, he called me sir. And I kind of felt, it made me feel good personally, like kind of a victory, but I felt like he kind of blew out, with some of the anger. People like to take a pot shot at you, and if you don't react with anger, sometimes that helps. But I gotta say, a lot of those angry things are bots. And so you're just, that's it. There's nothing you can do. I don't respond to every email. Some of them are not worth it. Sometimes I engage, though, and people who initially approach me with hostility, I engage, and we end up coming to some sort of an understanding. I had a guy just the other day, I had more in common with him. It was incredible. And I don't want to say I convinced him, but he was a denier, and we had a pretty good conversation. People want to be heard. They want to be engaged. They want to be part of something.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think tonight we have learned so much about open communication and listening and empathy and titanium router condoms.
Yeah.
I am thoroughly amazed and impressed. So let's give it up for Lee McIntyre. Lee will be out front in the lobby signing copies of his book, which are also for sale. And if you have questions that we were unable to get to today, I encourage you to stop by and have a quick conversation. Thank you so much.